I'm Jim, and this is my bike. It's a 2006 KTM 950 Adventure. My first bike was a 1974 Yamaha MX-80 that I bought with money I earned berry picking when I was 9 years old.
Was that when you first started riding?
I first started when I was 9, yeah.
Was that always what you wanted to do?
When I was 9, I thought my career was going to be a motorcycle mechanic, and that I thought that I could do that in my spare time between being a motocross superstar. It's my passion from 9 years old. Looking at motocross action and dirt bike magazines from my school library, having heroes in the early 80s and mid 80s motocross circuit, they seemed like cowboys, like ferocious and courageous and battling it out, and I wanted to be one.
So riding since 9, so that would put you to about what, 60 years of riding?
Yeah, it's close to 60. Yeah.
Okay, that's good. So how would you rate your riding skills?
My riding skills, I would say I'm somewhere around a solid intermediate. I don't think I hit expert on anything, but I've done a lot of different types of riding, and I enjoy all different types of riding. All the riding there is to watch on YouTube and TV, I love it all, from road racing, trials, enduro, hard enduro, motocross, supercross, I love it all.
Is there any sort of riding that you haven't done at all that you wanted to try?
I've never done circuit racing on an asphalt track. I've never done road racing. I'd like to try that. But I don't think I will. It's a big budget thing and it's a lot of commitment, so it doesn't seem like it's in the cards. I think I'll concentrate and do well at what I'm doing right now. My KTM 950 Adventure is a 950cc V-twin. It's designed for adventure travel, so my trips generally include, I try for half gravel or off-road and half pavement. In northern BC here, it lets me access a lot of areas that would be closed off and inaccessible by a strictly road bike. Forest roads and all the secluded campsites you wouldn't be able to get to with, say, a Harley or a sport bike.
Okay, so would you say that any regrets in buying this bike?
No regrets in this bike. I think that given the budget and given what was available at the time, I think it was the very best choice, and I've felt happy with it since and proud of it since.
And when you were considering buying that bike, was there any other bikes that you were thinking about?
Yeah, I was cross-shopping 950 Adventure with BMW 800 GS and, believe it or not, KLR 650. When I traveled down to Vancouver from Prince George to look at the BMW and the KLR, I stopped at Whole Shot and rode a popsicle orange KTM 950. And after that ride, that 20-minute test ride, I was completely sold. And I ended up paying more for a used bike than I would have for a brand new KLR. And I don't regret it one bit. I know that the KLR would have been workable, good. I get that. But the KTM just has something that makes you, it's more of an emotional connection with the bike and less of a tool and more of a partner. I just abandoned my idea of the KLR, even at, I think it was $5,200 brand new back then, and never looked back.
Was it to do with how the bike made you feel, or was it to do with the performance, or did you feel safe, or what was it about the bike that made you got it instead of the KLR?
I think it comes down strictly to how it made me feel. I remember coming back from the test ride and pulling into the parking lot at Whole Shot and sitting with the bike idling, and I looked up at the showroom window and there was about 5 people glued to the window looking out to see what kind of bike it was that had come in, and I was sold at that point. It was so much fun to ride. It's not excessively fast or powerful or anything like that, but it handles well, it shifts well, it brakes well, it feels like quality. And I was completely sold. I was not sold on the popsicle orange. I don't care for that color so much. And on that same trip, we carried on to the northern part of the island and picked up this 2006 black one.
Have you ever considered replacing this bike?
It's occurred to me recently. I went on a ride last year with a group of good guys. My bike was the oldest bike in the group, and it kind of felt like I was riding a classic compared to the high-tech TFT screens and cruise control and all that kind of stuff. It occurred to me that it might be getting long in the tooth, but I'm not there yet. It serves my purpose really, really well. The bikes that I would consider buying that are on the market now that would replace this one, they're not head and shoulders above. They're not massively better and so much nicer. There's bikes on the market now, like the Yamaha 700 Tenere. That's probably what I would get if this bike was, say, to get stolen or blown up or something. Tenere 700 is probably the closest in, say, mission statement. The 890 Adventure is very similar, but it somehow just doesn't quite do it. There's something about it that just doesn't quite hit that same mark. Tenere 700 is really, really close. I think that when I look at the new bikes, they're more refined, they're smoother, they're quieter, they're maybe easier to ride, and they have an awful lot more electronic aids, traction control, anti-lock brakes, all the fancies, cruise control, and digital dash with all kinds. It looks like a tablet sitting in front of you. Somehow the experience is different. This bike is fairly unrefined, fairly loud, fairly rough. Cruising on the highway is not relaxing and smooth. It's you want to minimize it, and you actually don't want to go that fast on it. I would say like it cruises at maybe 115 to 118 kilometers an hour is a comfortable cruise, whereas the BMW GS will do 140, no issue. It's not that bike. It just isn't.
So from your end, would you recommend buying one of these bikes for anyone wanting to go into riding?
If you were a rider with some experience and you wanted a more visceral ride, this would be a good choice. They're a quality bike, but maybe there's better choices as say a first bike or an entry into ADV riding. There might be better choices.
What would you recommend?
I would say something like DR 650, KLR 650, or I don't know. When I came back from a trip, the first thing I did was stop in and ride a Triumph Tiger 900. I think if I was buying a bike now and I had to replace this one, I think it would be Tenere 700 or Tiger 900 would be the two that would be probably the top of my list. Brand new, on warranty, smooth, reliable, everything perfect. That might be the better way to go. But if you're on some budget, it's a choice between no bike or this bike. Yeah, if you have say 7 to 10 grand and found one in good condition, low mileage that wasn't beat up too badly, it's a hell of a bike. It's an awful lot of bike for the 8-10 grand range.
What is your favorite thing about your bike?
My favorite thing is the versatility and that it has, like in terms of mission, what it'll do well. It does everything fairly well, nothing exceptionally well, but I seldom find myself stumped and unable to, say, ride a trail or cruise a highway. It's got a broad range of capabilities.
And do you ride often with your wife?
We've done quite a bit of riding. She likes this bike even more than I had a really large cruiser bike, a great big Yamaha cruiser, which I bought primarily as I thought it would be really good for a passenger. She says that the big bike felt like she was all alone in the backseat of a car, as opposed to this one where it's got decent passenger accommodations. The pegs are low enough, there's enough room on the seat, and with the top box on, there's a backrest. She said she feels more connected and more like she's riding with me than riding behind me as a passenger. Our last ride was a rental ride in Portland with a Harley Ultra Super Duper Glide, the biggest Harley possible. That was a fun ride.
Is there anything about the bike that you don't like?
The maintenance is difficult. When I first got it, oil change meant pulling both fuel tanks, the skid plates, the crash bars, just for an oil change. I would have dreaded having to do an oil change on the road, as opposed to, say, a DR 650 oil change is maybe 30 minutes tops. This one, my first oil change when I first got it, it took me like 7.5 hours of solid wrenching. I was learning it as I went, but still, it was an awful lot of process to do. That's number one. That can be fixed with a little hose for about $50. There's an extension hose that takes it down to about a 45-minute job. Not too bad. Number two would be this particular year of KTM 950 has a safety bead on the rear wheel that causes the tire to be one hell of a difficult tire to dismount. So the worst combination that I had when I got it was Heidenau K60 Scout on the 2006 950 rear. I had a flat, and it was an amazingly difficult job to dismount that very stiff tire. I've got different tires on it now that are a little bit easier to mount and dismount, but believe me, the K60 Scout on a 950 rear with this year is not a hand tools on the trail kind of job. There's just no way.
What have you added to your bike, and have you made any changes to the original?
I've kept it pretty fairly close to stock. I've got a high fender kit on the front, titanium exhaust on the rear that's fairly loud, bar risers, I think 2.5 inch, GPS, Moscow 80 that I run sometimes. But after that, not a hell of a lot.
Are there any plans in the future to add to the bike?
I think the bike is always going to be a work in progress. Since it's not new, it's starting to see its age. I see, in addition to maintenance, I'd like to go to longer suspension. This is the 210 suspension. I'd like to go to 245, which would be a full rebuild, new springs, new everything. It's time anyways for a full comprehensive maintenance. When I first got this bike, it felt really, really tall and fairly challenging to deal with. As I've gotten more used to it, the seat height is not such an issue.
What's the reason behind making the bike taller?
Longer travel suspension is going to help this bike with really hardcore off-road. When I'm running the hard bags, I don't get into such hardcore stuff. I'd like to start running it on more single track, more rougher log roads, more stuff where I'm closer to enduro riding, and the longer travel suspension is going to absorb bumps better, let me jump it a little bit more with more control.
Has the bike ever let you down?
One instance definitely comes to mind. I was in Vancouver area on a Sunday. The shift lever broke off the bike and fell out onto the freeway. The shift lever on a KTM 950 is not a straightforward kind of thing. It comes back, makes a dog leg, goes in and grabs the shift shaft, which is way under the motor. So it's not something you could put a vice grip on or kind of jury rig in some way. So after a bunch of messing around, I ended up joining the two broken pieces with a little band clamp and riding to Kamloops. Was the only place in BC that had a shift lever for one of these bikes in stock. I rode the whole ride, shifting as little as I could to avoid breaking the shift lever off. It was a little bit nervous ride, and got that shift lever and haven't looked back. But other than that, not a lot of failures, not a lot of breakdowns.
Would you say it's difficult to find parts for this bike then?
I think over the next few years, yes. The bike has a lot of common parts with other KTM models, but all the 950 specific parts that aren't interchangeable, I think they're going to start to become more and more difficult to find. I think I'll find out one by one which those parts are, and I might have to work on hoarding some parts to keep this thing rocking for another few years.
It sounds like a very expensive hobby.
Yeah, it's an expensive hobby. Yeah, there's no question. It's not cheap.
And if you were to replace this bike tomorrow, what would it be?
Tomorrow?
Assuming budget is unlimited.
Right. Tomorrow, I think I would get a blob of cash, and I would go look at a Tenere 700, and I would look at a Tiger 900. The Tiger 900 visually is, to me, a much more handsome bike. The Tenere 700, I've seen so many videos of guys riding the wheels off those things and making them into dirt bikes. That has an appeal to me. But I test rode that Tiger 900, and that motor, it's a great motor. It growls and it sounds awesome. It's a lot of fun to ride.
How would you compare that to your KTM?
Surprisingly, the Tiger 900 feels quite similar in terms of riding position, weight distribution, cornering, but it's smoother, more refined, a little more precise, I would say. When I looked the Tiger up and down, it looked like it was more delicate. It looked like if you were to crash it, more expensive bits would get broken or damaged.
Okay, and speaking of crash, have you ever crashed your bike?
This bike hasn't been crashed hard. I've never stacked it in really hard, but it's been down sort of moderate or medium, maybe 6 to 10 times at low speeds and medium speeds. Last year, coming down from a very high mountain pass trail, I lost the rear brake and lost control because I only had front brake and it wasn't stopping me on gravel, and put it in and did a little bit of damage to the left side.
So with your bike being almost 20 years old, doesn't that worry you?
I know that eventually, I haven't lost confidence in the bike yet in terms of would I ride it to, South America. Yes, with a week of prep and some comprehensive looking over, I would, sure. At some point, I think every machine runs to the end of its life. All the consumable parts, the rubber hoses and the wires and all that, eventually, I think you can expect those to fail eventually. They're not immortal. I'm going to do what I can to run this bike forever. It suits me really, really well. Confidence in the bike, I think it'll fail eventually. I think I'll be on the road when it fails, and I'm hoping that it just makes a better story. It makes a better adventure, and I can, scrounge in the jungle for a KTM 950 XYZ, what kind of bolt it needs or part it needs.
Have they stopped manufacturing 950 entirely?
Yeah, the last year for 950 was 2000, I think, 6 or 7. Then they went to KTM 990. It's a similar motor, but a fuel-injected bike, still the LC8 motor. Then they've morphed that motor out until it went to 1050, 1090, 1190, and I think the final iteration was 1290, which is like almost 150 horsepower bike, a little bit bigger than this one, more fuel. It's a great big bike. It looks like a lot of fun to ride. I would consider one of those two as a great travel bike or passenger bike, but I don't think I'm big enough to handle a 1290 off-road with any confidence. It's a really big bike.
If someone were to buy your bike today, what the requirements would be? Does someone have to be of a certain height, certain weight, certain skills, certain experience?
I'd say the requirement would be, I'm probably on the short side for a bike like this with the 210 mil suspension. I've got maybe a 31-inch inseam, and I'm confident on the bike. But I think if you had, say, 29-inch inseam, the bike might not be a good choice. It's fairly heavy at almost 460 pounds, and that's going to be also a factor. I mean, the KLR is also heavy, so it's not like it's a ton heavier, but it is a big bike. It is a tall bike. I would think anybody over, say, 5'8", 5'9", with a 30-inch inseam at minimum, and able to handle the weight, meaning if the bike fell over, you'd be able to pick it back up again. I think that would be a candidate. In terms of riding skill, no, I don't think there's no baseline skill required to be good with one of these bikes. It's a friendly bike to ride. It's not difficult to ride. It's fatiguing to ride. It can be. It's the wind buffeting, the noise, the vibration. I think you could set the bike up differently with a bigger windshield, smoother tires, and lower suspension, and it might be great for on-road. But I think maybe you should buy a bike that suits your needs better than one of these.
What are your riding plans for this coming year?
I'd like to do more BDR style riding. That really appealed to me. I'd like to do some, say, week or 10-day long rides with camping and moderate, 2-track, log roads. And not sure, I haven't picked a BDR yet, but that appeals to me a lot. Washington BDR last year was a lot of fun. I had a great time on it. And I would pick another BDR that's within, say, a week ride of home, do that and come back as a big loop trip. I think that would be a great ride. This bike's very, very suited for that kind of riding, where I can take enough, luxuries and stuff. I'm not, hard camping, but I could bring tent, sleeping bag, stove, cooking stuff, extra clothes, all that on the bike, and it handles it fine.
Did the bike perform well during that trip?
On the Washington BDR, this bike was, I felt like I was on the right bike the whole time. I felt like it was a perfect choice.
Would you repeat that trip with the same bike?
In a heartbeat. It was so much fun. It was a great trip and a lot of fun. The 950, yes, a great choice for that ride. I think that, yeah, absolutely. I might take the hard bags off and run soft, like that Moscow 80 might be a better choice on a BDR. I had one, actually, on Babyhead Hill, after that really hard first section. The second section's not quite as hard. I got into a bit of a weave. I got maybe, lazy, and I got into a bit of a weave, and I was terrified that if I, say, put a foot down to save the weave, my hard bags were going to take out my ankle or my shin. And I'm thinking that the soft bags might be a better choice for that kind of a ride, where if you were to crash, the chances of the bike injuring you would be less. Well, that's the theory anyways.
Would you say that this bike is suitable for, like, say, sand and mud and gravel and all kinds of, conditions?
I'd say that as the conditions get worse, your skill level has to get better to ride this thing successfully. Slippery clay mud is very difficult. It's a heavy bike. You can do it, but you better have your full concentration on the bike. And things go wrong really fast. Things go around so fast that you're on the ground before it's not even 1 second you're on the ground. I think that there's better choices of bike for very difficult terrain, but if you want to ride from your base to the beginning of the trail and back, a bike that was say a KTM 690 or a 500, much better choice for off-road. The 500 will handle things this thing would be a real handful on, but there's that transiting to and from. A 500 size bike is going to be much more difficult to ride on the freeway, or not it's difficult, say uncomfortable. It's going to be much less comfortable on the freeway to get to and from. With where I live, the challenge is getting to the trailhead from where I live, to an interesting trailhead. It's got to be a compromise.
Is this a good bike if someone were to start venturing into, say, traveling from place to place?
I think that if you're willing to put in the time to take care of the bike, the bike needs you and you need the bike. It's a more of a relationship than I think you'd get with a brand new bike. With a brand new bike, when it needs something, it goes to the dealer and the dealer reflashes the computer module and away you go. This bike needs you to tinker on it and to be at least somewhat mechanically competent so that you can do a lot of your own work. I wouldn't want to be putting this bike into a dealership every time it had a little issue. International trips with this bike have been limited to the US only. I haven't gone any other country with it. Some local camping, some BDR style riding, trips to, say, the island. I also ride this bike with my dog in a custom dog box that I built for the back of the bike. He rides as a passenger. I'll do a separate video on that, and I'll cover that in great detail because I get a lot of people slowing down and poking their cell phones out the window to capture that, and I get a lot of people asking me questions when we stop at gas stations to fuel up. It's an awful lot of fun to ride, and the difference, I think the big difference between my riding with my dog and everybody else is that my dog's 75 pounds, so he's a full-size dog, and he's safe and comfortable the way I've got him set up. So I'll do a separate video on that to cover that. But internationally, I like to travel internationally and ride, but I always end up renting bikes. When I retire, I think I'll end up buying a bike and putting it somewhere and riding from there, and I'm looking forward to that.
Would you be looking for another KTM 950?
Yeah, that's awesome that you asked that. I've seen a few 950s for sale for fairly reasonable price. And I did some looking into how much it would cost to ship one overseas, to station it overseas. And it's sort of like when you order a burger and you're on a diet. You know full well there's better choices, and you still want that burger. So yes, I would consider buying a 950 or 990 and using that as my overseas bike. Even though it might not make the most sense, it's still, the heart wants what the heart wants. So I may end up doing that.
Does your bike have a name?
So a good friend of mine, named his bike the other day, and he sort of threw it out there, and I felt like I should name mine. My bike's never had a name, and I've never named a vehicle before. So I thought about it, and I came up with Crazy Mary. And I think that kind of suits the bike as... I think it suits the bike for its personality.
So your bike is a girl?
That was a challenge too. So I asked my wife whether a bike should be named a girl name or a boy name. She said a girl name, so I don't know. I mean, it could have been Bob or Joe or anything, but Crazy Mary seemed like the right way to go.
Does the bike have any known weaknesses or problems that you're aware of?
I keep hearing people talk about KTM fuel pumps. As far as I know, my fuel pump is original. I think I'll be preventatively replacing it this year. Fuel pump failure on this bike means you're not riding. The tank fuel outlet is lower than the carburetor, so you're done. That's a known weakness. After that, not an awful lot of known weaknesses. Subframe failure can happen if you overload it with gear and passengers and ride on rough terrain. After that, I think the failures on this bike are going to be probably age-related.
What about the cost of maintenance? Would it be cheaper or more expensive to try to maintain it?
I think that cost of maintenance is probably going to be just about identical to a new or another bike. It's not especially cheap or expensive. Spare parts, like say new OEM spare parts, are kind of in line with what most bikes are. Sometimes they're laughably cheap for say a seal or a screw or a bolt. Sometimes they're not available, so that's a hassle. And then sometimes the prices will knock your socks off. They're crazy. Replacing a fuel tank is very, very expensive, and that's the first thing that will get broken in a crash. So I'm hoping to never have to replace a fuel tank.
Okay, so what happens if it breaks?
Look on eBay, find a used one, try for a black one. If you can't find one, repaint an orange or some other one, yeah.
Would you ever consider selling your bike?
Never, ever. Never. I'm keeping this bike till I die. Somebody can have it after I die. But the bike doesn't owe me a lot after all these years. If I bought another bike and retired this one to, say, reduced duty, that would be fine. I would put a stablemate beside it, but I'll never sell it. Let's do it.